Welcome, everyone. We are at our session 8 or episode 8, right, Mike? It's season 1 of the No Stroke podcast. We're moving right
Getting
along.
up there, almost
Yeah,
double digits,
yeah.
and a morning recording for
This
us.
is an much earlier actually for us Friday morning recording. We have 2 more. We're gonna hopefully we talked a little bit about in our last session to wrap up season 1. We might make another try to in-person podcast coming up in a couple of weeks, but we got a couple more folks coming in and we're hopefully a surprise for the last one. So let's talk about this morning. One of the reasons why we had our an early start here is our guest is from your old neck of the woods, right?
Across the old pond, yeah. Connection I made when I was spending some time in Ireland. It's a really interesting company that's been around for a little while in the digital health and wearable space, and fits the theme of gait and mobility that we've been focused on here in season 1. So excited to bring him in shortly. But before we get started, first off, did you watch any of the Olympic opening ceremony this morning?
No, totally,
No.
just totally spaced on.
But it was pretty, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, beautiful. The Japanese culture and everything. It always fascinates me. A place I want to get to, Tokyo for sure. But yeah, they did quite well with it. It was an amazing, it just
Oh,
ceremony, the way that they opened things up. But you could always go back. That's the beauty of YouTube, David.
yes, and I'm
You can
wondering if
always
the
go back and
yeah,
find what
maybe
you
they'll
need.
put it in prime time tonight. We'll see. We'll see.
Ah,
I
there you
totally
go.
thanks for the
That's
reminder
more your.
though.
Well, I know
Usually
because I'm sure you were out for a run and doing, your million
not this
things.
morning. Fridays, I get mine in. I get mine in Thursday night, knowing that Friday it's not likely to happen early in the morning. So
Don't
uh
blame you.
got the
All
mileage in
right.
last night. Let's get
Well,
rolling.
here, let's start with our theme. So we'll have a couple minutes until Shamus joins us. So let's start with in the news. So hot off the press this week, we have a few articles for you. So first headline is BMI may affect cognitive impairment after stroke. So this was again, just an article that was put out by the Helio article of neurology in a scientific report. And it really just focused on a study that looked at how different BMI levels, so body mass index, so that calculates, the amount of, really, it's always been back and forth, but a lot of people use it as that target indicator for, are you obese or not, but we'll let it fly anyway. But the main thing was here, if your body weight, if you're a healthier individual, you have less instances of cognitive impairment. Moving on. Second one was focused on comprehensive primary care is vital to holistic care and optimal recovery after stroke. So I thought this one was interesting. It was a recommendation from the American Heart Association that's trying to put some structure into post-stroke rehab and that connection into primary care. So trying to say that, within the first 30 days, I believe, when was it? So generally, they're trying to say that your first primary care appointment should happen within 1 to 3 weeks, and that the average visit currently is within the first 45 days. So, bit of a disconnect.
Yeah.
And wouldn't it be amazing if you could just meet that PT or your primary care physician over video?
Early on, set the individual up for
Yeah.
success in their family, for sure.
Mm-hmm. And lastly, this was a pilot trial looking at sensory stimulation as a treatment for improving mobility in stroke survivors. So last one, I know where you're going.
Yeah,
Let's
that
hear it.
goes, sure thing, Mike. That goes in line with our theme, sort of for this past month and since the start of this cast too, is that,
Yep.
we're doing a lot around trying to improve access and resources and awareness around improving balance and mobility. And that study was really interesting. It's only a feasibility study, and that was in the UK. So there was, looking at my notes, 34 individuals, but it was over between 6 and 16 weeks. They either had external stimulation from mobilization, more hands-on pre-gait treatment from the therapy team, which, one of the limiting factors for that is therapists are, one of the things that they're often overburdened with, wearing out their hands. So I think they like the other one is using technology, and maybe the other half of the group was they had textured insoles. And what I was looking for in that study was some of the gait analytics, and if there was a difference. But with it being a feasibility study, I think they were looking at tolerance, and both groups
Right.
tolerated, and sets the stage for further study. And I think with wearable fabrics and other things that are coming and really making improvement along that line, I think you'll see the ability to see more of this. But it kind of paves the path to invite our guest in, because maybe measuring some of these changes or is one of the things that our guest can talk about more about his product and his team. So why don't we make the introduction, Mike? You
Yeah, I think
know this individual quite well.
Yeah, Shamus. So again, kind of he's a friend of mine that I was able to connect with during my time in Dublin. He is currently still there, runs a company, Kinesis Health Technologies, and we've had a few conversations, over the years, looking at how his tool can assess and support stroke survivors in the home. So without further ado, we'll bring Seamus in, and I'm sure he will give a much better introduction. Audio, video, connecting. It's a long way over the sea.
Yeah.
James, good morning. Good afternoon, should I say.
Good morning and good afternoon.
Hey, good afternoon to you, Seamus.
Hi, David.
Hi there.
How are we? Apologies for, I know it's been a few back and forths to get this happening, but my brain is still trying to figure out the time zone differences now that I'm back home. It's been an adjustment for me, so thanks for the patience.
No problem at all.
Yeah.
How are you doing today?
We're good. We were just chatting about David missed the opening of the Olympic Games this morning. Did you catch a glimpse of it?
I didn't actually. It's completely gone over my head. I think the Olympic Games, maybe it's not that it's a non-event this year, but it certainly doesn't have the profile it may have had in years gone by.
No, they had. Yeah, I think Ireland were the third team out the gate of the countries represent when they started the all the teams kind of walking out together. But yeah, it was nice. I think they had, is it McIlroy, the golfer, or yeah,
Rory McIlroy,
yeah, he was I think he's the captain of the Irish squad this year.
Oh, was he the flag bearer? Was he?
Yeah.
All right, yeah.
Like, is he from the north? Is he from Northern Ireland though?
Yeah. He is, yeah.
Oh, that's a difference then, right?
Well, as am I. So
okay.
We won't get into a political debate now, but you have the opportunity to pick Ireland or
represent
or GB. Sorry.
Nice. I know that. Well, yeah. Best of luck to Ireland in it.
Likewise in the US. I'm sure you guys will do well.
Yeah, we'll see. But here, Shamus, we started the conversation this morning. We always pick a few topics that are hot off the press in the news relating to stroke recovery. Over the last few weeks, we've seen so much money being pumped in a lot of the funding is, kind of the acute stage. So beforehand, looking at, whether it's thrombectomy or, AI techniques to kind of evaluate CT scans. But this morning, there was a study looking at wearable sensors in the home to monitor gait, and it was a primary or early study, so it wasn't really in the feasibility stages, but it kind of teed up very well to what you guys have been doing for so long, and where you're pushing to into the market. So I gave a bit of a background into yourself and how we've connected over the years, and Kinesis in general, but I'd love to open the floor and kind of have you give the audience your background and what made you get into your startup Kinesis Health.
Sure, thanks. So Seamus, the CEO of Kinesis Health Technologies, I presume you have outlined that. So, and Kinesis is the Greek word for motion and movement. So when we were setting up the company, we wanted something which represents what we do, is measuring motion and movement, applying it to health, and obviously with the technology aspect. So that's why we went for Kinesis Health Technologies. Prior to setting up the company, I was involved in leading the research in terms of managing the research program, which was the foundation of the work we've been doing in terms of commercializing, which is a large industry academic research centre based in Dublin, Ireland, including University College Dublin, Trinity College Dublin, St James's Hospital, and Intel. So the background for me was I did work in Intel for a number of years in computer science, as an interest in technology, obviously, and then the convergence of technology into the healthcare space, which some 14, 15 years later is still only breaking through, was seen as an exciting opportunity that at some point the dam is going to break, and technology will be seen as an enabler and a facilitator in healthcare, as it is in many other different segments and sectors, which is still going there. There's a lot of work being done in EMRs and EHRs and in terms of digitizing health records, but really fully adopting technology, it's somewhat more of a slow and steady pace. So really, my background is in computing, looking at aging and aging, the challenges with aging. The core focus for Kinesis and the mission we have is around falls prevention, and that's something which was a core element of what we did in the fundamental research program, which was TRIL, or Technology Research for Independent Living. And falls prevention as a geriatric giant is a major issue that still needs to be properly tackled. And what we do is providing solutions, digital health solutions, to engage, empower, and motivate older adults to take action on falls. So really, it's about providing the healthcare professionals, the healthcare system, but most importantly, patients, with more information about their status, and also what they can do to take action to prevent that. Because quite early on, we realized that the most important stakeholder in affecting change is the patient. And we were always trying to serve the health system and the healthcare professional, giving them the information and the data that we think that they need, and they do need, but I'm not sure they fully appreciate it, but patients do. So patients do fully appreciate data, biofeedback, information on how they're doing. So a kind of a circuitous route to introduce Kinesis, but that's kind of background for me.
It's an interesting, thanks for that. That's an interesting point of like, and when did that shift happen that you realized like, well, maybe the word that's always floats out there, the empowered patient, right? So when did you kind of start seeing that? Was it through user research, or what made that trajectory happen?
Yeah, it was, we were doing some parallel research projects in UCD, University College Dublin, and the whole topic of health literacy came up, and really to fully affect change and to fully deliver on behavior change, we need to improve health literacy. We need to improve the understanding of health issues and conditions for patients, for them to take action. Because I know, David, with no disrespect, healthcare professionals have a very important role in improving health, but they're not the sole contributor, and patients, as you well know, and I'm sure are champion of, have to engage and have to take ownership for the most part. They know their health often more than most, and they know when something's going wrong. They know when something's changing. And we started by even in our product, our first product, we were developing the reports coming from the solution. targeted at the healthcare professional. I never thought that, the older adult would be getting a false risk report, because we wouldn't want to, scare them. We wouldn't want them to become alarmed if they're at high risk. So we always would have been focusing on, okay, let's send the data and provide the results to the healthcare professional, and then they can talk to the older adult about their status. But quite quickly, we understood from usage patterns is that the older adult is walking away with the report, or they want to know what's in the report or want to understand more. So we kind of changed the kind of flow and the design to be making more legible to a broader audience. And I guess that's where it kicked in for us, is that when you're starting out as a young company trying to break into the healthcare market, you become somewhat subservient to the health system and the healthcare professionals. Well, what do you need? What do you need? What do you need? And sometimes they don't know. But in reality, we should be in a position to call out where there's some weaknesses in the health system and say, actually, you're not communicating well enough with your patients. You're not giving them the information that they need. And we can help you with that, but we can't just say, we'll keep doing what we're doing. So that's kind of, it wasn't a light bulb moment by any means, just a series of experiences that we had to really, make me aware and us aware that unless you're engaging patients, you're really not going to have the same impact that you could have. So that's it.
Yeah, that's really a powerful point there, Seamus, and kudos to your team for providing more information to the patient, because that's one barrier to care now as a clinician is, back to the patient. A lot of the data that we're putting into our EMRs doesn't really empower the patient. So that data and those analytics, and I'm more sensitive to that than ever now over the past 18 plus months that I'm doing entirely telehealth and continue to support my clinical side of my practice through this face-to-face time, and the data and using technology becomes ever so important on the telehealth side for the patient to be able to have those subtle changes. So I'm really interested in you telling us more about that, the patient assessment tools that your companies offer too, because I was really interested. This is the time for those tools to really get into the hands of the folks that can benefit the most from them.
Yeah, and I think as patients, we've all been patients in some respect, and sometimes you feel like you could be seeing that you're just serving the health system, providing them data for what end, what result. So it needs to be a bit more of a bi-direction, a bit more of a conversation. It has to be flowing both ways versus collecting data. It was all up into the mainframe, and you have very little knowledge of what's going on. I think that is changing. That is certainly changing, and certainly we're not necessarily pioneers in that. Most health technology companies or technology companies in health are looking at that, and how do we provide more back to the patient, and wrestle control back from the health systems, the hospitals that like to be the controller and arbiter of a lot of this data. And I know there's certain activities in the UK actually is Patients Know Best is an initiative where if health systems sign up, that they can actually share their data that they're collecting on patients with those patients who sign up and register, that they have access to that data. Now it's a slow burn, but it is starting to gain traction, and it makes sense. Like, well, who owns the data that is being collected? Who controls it? It's not necessarily a legal argument, more philosophical. It's like, okay, well, everyone, maybe we can share the data. People need access for different reasons, but at least patients need access as well, and that's something which we're looking at. But even just the simple thing is that from my own perspective, I had some lower back issues a few years ago, and I went to see a neurosurgeon and to get some treatment and interventions, and they were just basically getting me to walk around their office and watching me, and I'm like, oh yeah, no, I see, or I'll note that down, and you go in a few weeks later, and there's no context for me as a patient. completely blind to what they're seeing, if anything, in that, because it's not measured objectively, it's just an observation. And similarly, like, you know, going to a physical therapist and you're getting them, or they get you to do exercises in front of a mirror to show you where you're going wrong, and actually I can't see it, you know. Do you see the movement in your knee? I'm like, no, I don't see it. So even if they were to give me a little bit of data to say, actually, you know, small, because most of the impairments that maybe are only slight and very, you know, to the untrained naked eye, you're not going to see it. So having some data, and even if it's only a 5% change, it could be significant 5% change. So that's where we're trying to, with our solutions, that providing more context and more biofeedback to patients, either in clinic or at home, for them to have a better understanding of their own health. Not only just to give them that understanding, but to encourage them to do the things that they should be doing, for example, to prevent a fall. So just telling somebody you're 78 years of age, you're at high risk of falls, or you can brand them, tag them as that, but that's not good enough. You know, there is people who are possibly high risk. There's people at medium high risk and people at low high risk, and you know, and people at the very high can come down, and what we do is we provide a specific score for an individual from 0 to 100. So it's a percentile probability that they're a faller from 0 to 100, but people can improve and see a reduction. Now, they still may be high risk, but they could come from a 95% down to a 75%, which is progress. And whereas, you know, we're saying you're not at high risk, we want to make you not at risk at all. They say, well, you know, is that feasible? Is it reasonable? But we can still improve their status. So that's what we're trying to do, is with information through our solutions, providing more context and hopefully a greater motivation to engage in the treatments that we know work to prevent falls.
Fascinating. Thank you for kind of taking that deep dive. And I'd be curious, just for our audience who are sitting at home, I had the fortunate opportunity to be able to see this in action, right? See how the tools work. But can you maybe just describe quickly, if I was a stroke survivor sitting at home, or a caregiver listening who has a parent or a loved one who's suffered stroke and at risk, how could your technology help them, and what would that look like? What kind of data would they be looking at?
So we have two solutions, or two sets of solutions. One which is for professional use, for supervised assessment of gait and function based on the timed up and go test. So that uses external sensors that go on the left and right leg of the patient for that supervised assessment. So that would be administered by somebody who's assessing a patient either at home through a visit, or in the community, or in clinic, and that's done on a regular basis. So it's a standard functional test, instrumented with sensors, and then our software runs analysis and gives them a report. So, for example, it'll give them their full score. It will also then break down what category they're in: low, medium, and high risk, and then break it down even further to say, well, what are the 5 maneuvers of the TUG test, or the timed up and go test, which is driving that risk? Is it an issue with transfers, which is standing up or sitting down? Is it an issue with speed, or how they're walking? Is it an issue with variability, or steady gait or non-steady gait? Is it an issue with symmetry? Is there a problem with left leg versus right leg, which is obviously quite important from a stroke perspective? Do they have problems turning? Is there any vestibular issues in the turn? So all of those different elements are analyzed independently, and then the derived parameters in terms of their gait velocity, their stride length, their cadence, their the gait variability, all of the various different components are there, not necessarily for the patient to be absorbing, but to get some context. So for each of those scores is a population average. So, and everything is color coded. Where green is normal, orange is outside the normal range, and red would be a warning zone. Something should be looked at. So it's providing context to the healthcare professional, but also the patient. And then the second self-assessment solutions we have is based on the smartphone. So using the sensors on the phone to instrument functional tests, which is still a directed routine. It's not constant wearable where it's just listening and capturing data on their movement throughout the day. It's getting it through a directed routine, starting with the standing balance test, which is 30 seconds, eyes open, semi-tandem balance test. Adding in the 5 times sit to stand or sit to stand test as well as directed gait routine using the phone. So, and in this instance, it's maybe slightly less precise than the professional version, but based off one sensor versus instrumenting both lower limbs in the professional system. But it's more than good enough to give them context, to give them biofeedback for themselves on a regular basis. So if it's a stroke survivor who's post formal rehab, is at home, not getting the attention or not getting the long-term support that they could be offering, it's just basically picking up their phone, doing a standing balance test, looking at the guidance that is there for them to kind of improve their stability, gives them a specific balance score as well. So with that in mind, it's about, how can you, look at the community and, even talk not with your healthcare professional about that, but with your peers. So my father unfortunately had a stroke 5 years ago, and it was quite a severe stroke, and has reasonable recovery. It's pretty good function. It's not allowed to drive anymore. His peripheral vision and eyesight isn't as good, but in terms of overall function and ability, he's doing pretty well. But they have this, which used to be a formal meeting up of the stroke survivors in the area. We used to meet for a cup of coffee on a Wednesday morning every week, go in and just chat and talk. And for him, the greatest, support he was getting was from other stroke survivors, talking about their experiences. Mm-hmm. And the hospital even asked him to come down to talk to the healthcare teams, clinicians, because they were saying, like, we've never went through a stroke. We don't know what it's like as a patient to go through that. So solutions like, balance is where, even sharing their score, how's your balance, and just as just something to say, because we talk about how you're feeling today. Well, I'm good. The weather's good, so I'm good. Or I had a nice dinner, so I'm good. Or what's making you not so good? And even talking about, well, maybe my function, it's good or it's great. Or so just having context in terms of other parts of your life, in terms of your activity, in terms of your diet, in terms of your mood. Anything which we can kind of track on an ongoing basis, may allow us to kind of park maybe a bad mood or how we're feeling, versus having it linger on and on.
It's interesting. So you do that was something I was going to touch on, is kind of how you're that correlation between, all right, I'm improving my balance, I'm less at risk for a fall, and how that comes back into cognitive kind of function and your overall mood and happiness, I suppose, as a stroke survivor or someone going through rehab. So is that something you're currently tracking alongside of the balance? Yeah.
So the area of cognitive function linking obviously to motor function is, it's well understood that they're connected.
Yeah.
So looking at measuring function in a professional setting, but then measuring function through personal self-assessment is very important. So even for healthy younger adults, measuring balance is important. Balance isn't just an issue for an older adult or somebody who's got an underlying health issue. There could be other things going on. And balance is only one example. The overall endurance, fatigue, sit to stand, or getting into more cumbersome test. Just are they able to complete it better? So just providing them some context for them to really just have a better sense. And it's not for everybody. We all know that there's a certain cohort there. Well, I'll never assess. I don't want to know. And it's not that they're wrong. It's just that they're not motivated or driven by that. But there is a large proportion and growing who do want to measure, who do want to have information. Even I new phone there, and there's a nice little thing which counts your activity, a number of steps per day. And it's not that precise, and it's not that really important, but it gives me a general sense of how my day has been. How active have I been? I'm not taking it, as gospel. Though, I haven't done enough today. Let me go out and get another 3,000 steps. But it gives you an indication, and it actually does motivate you to do a little bit more. What we're trying to do is that for those who are post-formal rehab, who are left in that kind of vacuum where they're not getting anything, how can we, continue to encourage them to do the behaviors or the exercises which have been outlined by the formal therapy teams? So how can we do that? Well, we can give them some guidance in terms of how the function is, and it starts high and then it starts to go down again, and functions decreasing and risk is increasing. Well, then maybe need to start to do more in terms of their exercise program, which they were doing a lot post rehab or in rehab, but I'm doing less so now. There's about kind of prompts that hopefully will allow them to continue to, continue with the behavior change, continue with the good practices which have been outlined, and even strive beyond that, because maybe it was the program is now too easy. They feel like maybe they could do other things. So these are the sort of things with with this information, that their function and balance is good, and like the exercise programs are so simple and straightforward, they can move up a level. So it's just an example of how we can continue the conversation and support for that group beyond the form, which I think is a big issue, is that stroke survivors, stroke patients, is that there's a lot of attention, get a lot of focus, get a lot of support, critically challenging healthcare condition, and then after that 6 or 8 weeks post discharge, or maybe even earlier than that, they're left with support groups, which are really important. I don't underplay the importance, but they're actually probably more important than maybe having a conversation with a neurologist, because it's unlikely they're going to do another brain scan, but talking to somebody else about what their progress has been like, and or their family members. So not to to say that's not important, but to have some sort of a middle ground where there's some formal analysis, or even if the data is going back to the the health system or the hospital or the care team which is managing their formal care, but they're using that data themselves on an everyday basis. Maybe they'll go back in the 6-month review, they'll say, oh guys, you're doing really well, and let's keep it going, and encouraging them, versus with no data points on you from when we discharged you to you're sitting in front of me 6 months later.
Yeah, that's really interesting around the idea of you mentioned there's this group that might not want to know about this. Is almost like this denial part in some cases, and Mike and I talked on a previous episode about this, that sometimes the individuals will not share to their family that they're afraid of falling because they're afraid of losing independence. And if you get through that behavior change part that comes into it, and if you can initially create that awareness, there's the opportunity to have these additional touch points to move them along, so that they are knowing that just because their score may be off, and they may be a high risk, doesn't mean that that's it. Now is the time that perhaps they can do something about it. And with that said, is within the app and within your technology, is there a way for them to share that with an individual who may be remotely connected? Like I mentioned, some therapists continue to do therapy remotely and support now that telehealth has sort of gotten some traction and has maintained its drop back a bit. But is there an opportunity to share those maybe daily assessments or weekly assessments as part of their care plan for remote therapy?
Yeah, no, it hasn't been fully implemented, but that's very much part of the plan, is that, the data is predominantly controlled and owned by the individual completing it. And then they can kind of opt in or decide to share, because they may have somebody or they may not have. So the problem is, the challenge is, if the reason why they're getting it or being deployed is through the health system, they may see that it's the data for the health system. However, if it's a combination of, okay, well, this is an offer for you, if you want to use it, we can help. It'll help you kind of get more information where you are, and it'll also provide us with more information so the next visit will come in. So I think it's about that, I guess, the contract you have with your formal care team, or maybe less formal, but your care team, who you want to have access, or who is your support. Is it the therapist? Is it a carer? Is it a neurologist? Is it a family doctor or GP? Is it your your pharmacist? The care teams that we have around us is so broad and often very different. And that's something which we are really just exploring in terms of the use case, that we want to get the fundamentals of the assessment right, which is working hard on, but then it's about kind of the integration and use case. Well, who's driving the recruitment, who's encouraging usage, who's then going to respond to data coming in, and who needs to and who should. So they're the sort of business rules and technology rules which we're just teaching at the moment. But it's very clear that data for the individual is important, but sharing it is very important as well. Because as I mentioned before, going in to see your specialist in a few months' time, and if they have no data on you, they're maybe getting you to do assessments you've done 20 times in the last 3 or 4 months, and you're like, okay, well, can you just look at the data? You're going to observe me doing something I do every day and I measure. You just look at my data, and that's the sort of thing is that. And I know, and I can understand healthcare professionals pushing back on patient-generated data as well, because the credibility and reliability of some of the data is questionable. Let's be clear, it is, but I think they shouldn't dismiss too quickly, because if it is engaging the patient, that's the important thing.
100%. And so if there are folks listening who are interested and say, this is something that I want to bring in for either myself or a loved one, what's the route? Like, we talked about, care teams being empowered. So kind of two different sides of the house. So either you could have a clinical assessment, which would, sit with their PT, OT, but let's maybe focus on the, phone assessment, so is that something that's downloadable just for anyone in the app or in the app store to start using today, or how would that work for someone?
Yeah, no, so you can go on to Google Play. Unfortunately, there's only an Android version available. iOS is coming soon, so for all those iOS users, our apologies. But yeah, on Google Play, if you do search for Kinesis Balance free, you'll see that version, which is free. You download it, and it's kind of our first MVP in the space for people to use. So we don't collect any personal information. It just gives them balance assessment. They can check your balance and gives them guidance on falls. So for us, really, we're looking at it as a kind of a standard basic offer out to the community, but we're looking to then build enterprise versions of that, which inevitably will. And one of the challenges with digital health solutions is the trusted source. So we're not necessarily looking to drive this in a B2C or direct to patient model. It's coming through health systems or health payers for them to say that offer it to their patients or members respectively. Say, listen, if you want to assess your function in the home, here's a pull up we can recommend or provide to you. So that enterprise version will have a lot more tailored information for your locality in terms of, well, if you're part of a health plan, these are the services available for you, or if you're part of a health, or you're being cared for by a health system, here's your support services, etc. So that's the plan longer term. But at the moment, you can go to Google Play, Kinesis Balance free, download it, and start testing your balance.
Amazing.
Sounds great. We'll be sure to put that link in the show notes too, as well, so our followers can take action on that.
Absolutely. So maybe we'll wrap things up, and we always, all of our guests are asked a similar question when we finish up, and it's kind of taking a look at the future, right? So if we were to place a magic wand in your hand, and you spoke of your personal experience with dealing with back pain in an office where you didn't really have that high touch experience that you were seeking, and obviously your father going through a stroke and having that experience. So let's think 5-10 years down the road, what's that optimal recovery and rehab journey look like for either a stroke or tied into this digital health space?
Yeah, well, certainly I would see It's a good question. Optimal would be certainly something which is a little bit more, what's the word? Not, a little less temporary. Let's put it like that. So, and it's looking at the physical recovery and rehab, but also the emotional and psychological recovery and rehab, because there's obviously how someone's come through the physical changes, the physical damage that's been done by the stroke is it's not easy to repair that, and it's not easy to intervene and repair that quickly. But there is a lot of clinical care provided up front, and then there's a lot of physical care provided in that next period, and then there's little care provided then beyond. So for me, what I would like to see is that the good practice that we want patients to implement to keep going after rehab. I think the health systems and providers can do that as well, to say, listen, how can you not stretch out, but how can you prolong the care and support and guidance and advice for stroke survivors, and also empowering those support groups, which really were critical. I know with my father, he declined to go to them for so long because he didn't want to be seen as, we'd all meet in a local coffee shop, and he was like, oh, well, no, I don't want to be seen as with the stroke group, and then decline. And it's not that he was prerogative to them, but it was just that just didn't want to be. But from the day and hour he went, he just was like, it provided so much to him. So combining the formal and informal care and support groups for me, and prolonging and the supports that's been offered would be really what I think should be looked into. But I don't have that magic wand. It'll take a lot more hard work from you two guys and from me and everyone else involved to kind of make that happen.
You have anything, David, to
No,
wrap up?
Just well said. And that's a big part of healing. What you just mentioned, that point with your dad, that is really missing from, at least especially on the stroke side, having access to those groups to help as part of the healing. There's initially that denial and not wanting to be identified as having something wrong.
Yeah.
But like you observed, once your dad went and opened up a bit. So I think that's a great way to end, because that's part of the mission. And one of the things we're trying to accomplish at Enable Us is we want to provide the right physical support groups. We want to, whether it be physical or virtual in these days, but having the right tech tools at the right time, but having the community to support and connect care. So thank you so much for your time and working us into the middle of your day, early for us here, but I really appreciate it. It's nice to meet you again, and I thank you, and we'll certainly share all the good work you guys are doing with our group as well. So
that's
all from me, Mike.
Yeah, well, brilliant. And it's just to kind of touch on your point, Shamus, a common theme we've seen over these past podcasts that we've run, whether it's with folks like yourself who are in the space as a provider or technology company, or survivors, it's the common theme of connection after stroke, right? And we made a point last week of when you start a new job, you're put with someone in a senior position who you come in and you learn from, right? And it's the same thing as a stroke survivor. How can you, as a stroke survivor, be matched with someone similar background, similar demographics that you could really take on a journey with you and learn from? So it makes a lot of sense, and unfortunately, it's not the way the system is set up at the moment. And there's also a lot of barriers, because my mother, when she had her stroke as well, I think, granted, she was 28, but she was put in a room with people who are 70. She was like, "Get me the hell out of here."
Yeah.
Which you realize, but if we could be smart about it and say, all right, let's put people with likenesses together, and hopefully it'll what we call our community is a team of stroke thrivers, not survivors, thrivers. So
Drivers, yeah.
let's try to create some more of those. Well, thanks for your time, Seamus. And I know you're suffering a heat wave over in Ireland. It's about, what is it, 30 degrees? So.
We're breaking records every day. It's crazy hot here. So I'm perspiring at the moment with the window open. It's very hot, but yeah, it's not the spotlight you guys put on me. It's just the heat.
Fair. Well, I appreciate the time. Go take a jump in the Irish Sea.
Yeah,
catch a cool breeze. Well. Thanks again.
Temperature down. Okay,
right,
guys.
enjoy the rest of your day, Shamus. Bye now.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.